So, well, good evening, and this is my first live stream on my own. Normally, I do this with Elena, with the in Creators channel, and today we have here a good friend, Deborah Mahmoudieh. She's going to
Right.
tell us about how, well, in a way, Jesus defeated the Roman Empire. Well, not defeated, but maybe started the beginning of the end, um, what is called the she holds the belief that there were no usury money launderers, money lenders. They were more like those who Jesus expelled from the temple were more like traders. They trade money. They traded money for tokens, to worship the gods and everything. So it was a paper prey kind of setup, and Jesus abolished it. So, well, without further introduction, I'm going to let you meet my good friend Deborah Mahmoudieh, who's going to explain. In much better words than I do everything that I have been introducing. So, ladies and gentlemen, Deborah Mahmoudieh here.
Hello.
So yeah, what are your thoughts on this? What is the importance of Jesus? Because most people don't just live their lives without even thinking about it. So you got to this conclusion of what the actual importance of Jesus could have been, right? When we were discussing this, with Spartacus and everything. So yeah, just feel free to introduce us to the subject.
Well, it was on my research into history because I studied history, and many years ago I studied the history of money, like specifically coins. And as far as I could tell, some of the earliest coins that were ever produced were produced by the Roman Empire. Well, they were produced in Rome, and they were created, the gold coins were created specifically to worship at the temples, which Rome had lots of temples to different gods. And so people had to buy these gold coins, and they used to buy them with produce to go and pray to God. So you could not pray to God without these gold coins. And so that's why they were so important, that the Roman army had to be paid in gold, because generally the peasantry wouldn't have any access to be able to afford these gold coins. And so it meant that the soldiers would be able to have access to one of the gods, or the gods, to go and pray and to get blessings and to have their prayers answered. Because gold was considered a sacred metal because it's very pure. And I think it's very telling as well that the ancient South American people, their word for gold is basically translated means excrement of the gods, you see. So, but according to Rome, this is the most purest metal, and therefore it's a divine metal, and it belongs only to the nobility, the people that God has most blessed. The people who have the most gold were considered the most blessed by God, you see. And so then by the time you come to Israel during the Roman occupation, when Jesus was born, and that was why they'd had to go to Bethlehem for this census that Rome had imposed, because Rome collects taxes off everybody, you see. So the people have to go to the place they were born and then get registered. And so, and I think Rome had renamed the whole country. Well, I think the country was originally called Palestine, but it was known as Israel, which means land of God, was the common name for Palestine at that time, or for at least parts of Palestine around Jerusalem. And so with Rome had taken over everything. So it was an occupying force. It was an invading, occupying force, and it was well established there by the time Jesus was born. So a lot of the all of the religious orders and the institutions of the day would have become beholden to Rome's authority, and many people, acquiescing to that in whichever way, and especially the religious orders, which traditionally would hold the most power in any society during that time, because people were very, how would you say it? Well, they were very much worshipping gods of any kind, because people didn't have the same understanding that we have today. So they were very superstitious as well, And so from what I can gather, and as I say, I haven't found any direct evidence, but I think when you read the New Testament, which I know a lot of it, we can trust some of it. It's like an old tattered cloth that has been patched up by various people, but in between it you can find the original thread, the original garment. And I think that from certain things that Jesus is reported to have said, from what I can gather, and especially in relation to that story where he whipped the money exchangers out of the temple, then I think it seems, I was asking myself, well, why were people having to exchange the money? As a child, I used to wonder, well, what was all this about, these money exchanges? Because they weren't money lenders, they were exchangers, you see. And so from what I could gather was happening is that people were taking produce to the temple, like unspotted lambs and various, whatever produce they have, and they were exchanging it for money, and then they were having to use this money to buy temple coins so they could go and pray to God, you see. And it was only in later years, when I was researching the history of money and coins, that I understood what the Romans were doing with their, you've got to buy a temple coin in order to pray to God. That obviously that had then been transposed into Palestine during Jesus' time, and that the Jewish people were now following that same thing, where they were going to the temple and they were having to buy temple coins in order to go and pray to God. And so then that explains a lot of things about, that how revolutionary Jesus was, that he was attempting to re-establish Judaic faith as it was intended to be, that everybody was free to go and pray freely to God, that they can take their gifts to the temple if they want, but that wasn't a prerequisite to go and pray to God, and that nobody had to actually buy a coin in order to go and pray to God. And so these money exchanges, that's why he became so angry, because it was usury, which is expressly forbidden in Judaism. So he was absolutely enraged to find that basically the people who'd been made impoverished by the Roman occupation, the bulk of people, didn't have any means to be able to go and pray because they couldn't afford these coins. And, they were being basically sold at an extortionate price. So no matter, people needed a lot of money to be able to go and pray to God. And so then it makes sense about Jesus explaining to people, you've got John the Baptist at the time as well, who was slightly before Jesus as well. He was baptizing people, cleansing them of sin. Well, why? Why would there be any need to be a John the Baptist cleansing people of sin, especially Judaic people who had God, they had Yahweh, and they had their faith, and nowhere at any other time, it's understood that if they want to be forgiven or they want to confess their sins or do anything, they go to the synagogue, they go to their holy temple. And why suddenly in this time of Roman occupation, then you've got John the Baptist baptizing people, cleansing them of sin and forgiving them? And this was all because their temple, the Judaic temple had been usurped, and it had been turned into like a money making outfit through usury, and so people had no access. And then you come to Jesus preaching out in the open in the town on the Sermon on the Mount, and explaining to people, you don't need to go into a temple to pray to God. God is everywhere. Yahweh is everywhere. You don't need to go and pay money in a temple to be forgiven, to be cleansed of sin. You can actually take yourself to a river in the name of God and be cleansed of sin, And I think that is the important thing about the understanding of baptism. And what Jesus was about was challenging these religious orders that have become corrupted. And I think that is where we are today, that we need to understand that every faith in some form or whatever has actually become corrupted by time, through misunderstandings, through misinterpretations. And, I'm hoping, well, I've started work on it, but I'm hoping later this year at some point to publish a book that goes through a lot of these misinterpretations and providing what I would say a more reasonable and more accurate interpretations of what the faith was actually about and what was really going on. And so what I do in a lot of ways is read between the lines and include some common sense, some experience of people, of human beings, how people think and the dynamics of the history of what was going on at the time, because that is my speciality. I studied history of art, design and film as part of my degree, and that was all about looking at art, literature, architecture, so many things in society, like understanding what was going on through the context of art and through faith and what was going, how these things make history, how we arrive at the place that we arrive today. And I think understanding the Bible and understanding the stories within the Bible and getting to understand more accurate interpretations of those is very important, because whether or not people believe in God or Jesus, it's what it is that these stories have had a profound impact on the foundations of the consciousness that we are today as a species. They've had such a profound impact over time, right down to women not having rights, women and children being stripped of rights, and just so many things. I've been using the King James Bible to read, because I think that has had the most profound impact historically. And so what was interpreted there and what was presented to the public and how it was interpreted has had a massive impact that does echo right through to today, because it's those people that had grown up through history understanding the Bible in those terms and these words. And it is like I say, whether people of today believe it's true or not, in terms of God and Jesus, what it is that has actually shaped our history, that consciousness. The people that have believed in that, or the people who've profited through claiming to believe in that, have the most power. The coronation of King Charles, that is by, that's going to be by the religious orders, isn't it? Just as it was with his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. She was crowned as wholly ordained. She was crowned head of state and church. So effectively a queen and a pope, you see. And that's going to be the same with King Charles that effectively is going to be king of the state and also Pope as head of the Church of
of England.
England, which I don't think any other country has that, where
No,
there is
well,
both head
I,
of the state and church.
I think that the Church of England well also has some power in the Commonwealth countries like Canada, Australia, maybe a bit in the United States.
Canada as well.
Yeah, exactly. So I believe it's like it's not without power. It's like I mean it's more like the Anglo-Saxon world, but well, I think there are even countries that they have some minor church, minor churches like probably there are like in Spain, Greece, like touristic countries, like just in case British tourists want to just go and pray. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure similar like their missions, like they're not unique to England, I believe, but
Yeah. Well, I
maybe
was watching. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
no,
I was just going to say I was watching one of Kevin Annette's videos. I don't know if you know of Kevin Annette
no.
from Canada. He, along with the Native American people, well, the Native Canadians, I suppose they would be called in Canada, the Indigenous people, he along helped them to expose what had been going on in those residential schools, that they were taking native children into these schools, stealing them off their families. And there were Catholic schools, but there were also a lot of Protestant residential schools that were authorised by the Church of England, and directly authorised, some of them as well, by the Queen. And children were being very badly abused in those schools, I think right up until the 1980s. And I mean, the stories that came out, they did have a trial, like a common law court kind of a trial. Was it in the early 2000? I forget which year. Was it 2006? And they found, was it Pope Ratzinger guilty, and they found the Queen Elizabeth guilty. I think she was sentenced to 25 years in prison, and Pope Ratzinger was sentenced to 25 years in prison. And immediately, I think it was within a week of that sentence being passed, Pope Ratzinger resigned as Pope, which
I
has never
remember.
been known, and
Unprecedented.
never ever come out from the Vatican. And the Queen, well, I think somebody did try to arrest her and was immediately arrested and sectioned, but then I think they were released soon after, and that's as much as I know about it. But I thought it was very telling that Pope Ratzinger immediately resigned, like within a week of that sentence, and it was, to all intents and purpose, a proper court. I forget the exact name of the court. It was an international tribunal type court. It was it was a common law court.
Yeah, I remember.
Jurors, they had witnesses, and some quite prominent names to judge what was being said. And I mean, somebody should be made to pay for that. These people have never been compensated. Not that, how can they really be compensated? But it's still happening now. Like native women are going missing, and nobody's really doing anything about that.
Well, I remember also stories that they were trying to just do the thing to them during the pandemic. Like they were trying to. Um, and they were like all trying to defend themselves. They went deep into the wild. There were stories. I don't know what happened. That was also in Australia. Not just in
Mm.
Canada. In Australia, the Aboriginals, they try to, because that's another thing they've done. Especially in the ex-colonies of the British Empire. The Commonwealth. They put all these indigenous peoples on welfare, which I think might appear like it's a good thing, but it's a way to control them, because while they're on welfare, they don't have their own independence. They don't uh, have their jobs or anything. They just depend entirely upon the state to provide for them. So in the end, when they say, like they say, well, you need to take this drug or that drug or whatever, they have no choice. They just because otherwise they lose the benefits. So I
Yeah.
think they use it as a double edged sword against them. And they use some of these tactics, to undermine them, in general.
Well, they did
So
the same thing in Britain, during enclosure. That's people still believe, and children are still taught in schools today, that enclosure was all about, producing wheat, because regular farming in Britain wasn't producing enough wheat. And without this wheat, there was going to be a famine and a shortage of bread, and there was going to be some sort of revolution. And, because at the time, that's what had recently happened in France. Actually, what was happening is that the aristocracy of Britain were very worried about what had happened in France, the French Revolution, and they saw how the upper middle classes, anxious for more power, had managed to seize the power of the working class people, the peasantry, and had managed to stir them up to gain enough power, manpower, to overthrow the ruling regime and reinstall whatever came after. And so the British were very aware that there was a massive amount of peasantry in Britain, because 80% of the British population during the time of enclosure, which would have been around 1750 when they started the second, because there had been a form of enclosure before then, but it was very sporadic. But they started full on with this enclosure from the 1750s onward. And so they were very worried that the peasants could be rounded up, and that they would then overthrow the monarchy, and there'd be some sort of revolution, because the middle classes in Britain, the upper middle classes, the non-aristocracy, were vying for power, because all the power was held within the landed gentry, you see, and only they had a right to vote and to hold a seat in Parliament, and because you had to own some land. And so what they did was they compromised, the aristocracy compromised and said, well, okay, you can have some land, but you will have to buy your land, and you will buy the common lands. We'll privatize. What enclosure was about? It wasn't enclosure. We need to start using modern day thinking and modern day terms for what was going on historically, so that modern day people can understand the truth of it, you see. So we're not talking about enclosure. What we're talking about is privatization of common lands. That is what happened. And that's what happened in America and in Canada with the indigenous people, is that their common lands were privatized. And the Industrial Revolution went a step further, because it also took away from the people the rights to be able to produce their own goods, their own shoes, their own materials, cloths, metalwork, medicines, everything people produce for themselves. The same with the Native American people. Human beings, when left to their own devices without any oppressive, usury-based ruling powers, look after themselves. We make our own clothes, our own homes, our own shoes, our own food. We don't need any of this. The factory, the machines are good to help people not to have to spend all the time on that kind of labour. That should be the benefit of it. But we're not getting the benefit because what they've done is they've used human intelligence and human technology to enslave people rather than to liberate people, rather than to create a better standard of humanity and raise human consciousness. They oppress and they actually degrade human consciousness.
Yeah, in fact, we are going to find a way to go back to the main subject by like saying that I always thought, have you heard of Anthony Sutton? He was a
Yeah.
British, yeah. He wrote like Wall Street Financed, Nazism, and other books. He found all these paperwork, invoices, and transactions and things proving that Wall Street had financed from the Russian Revolution to like basically the Second World War with Hitler, the rise to power and everything. And uh, I remember like he was in a think tank himself. He was quite a neoliberal. He was not like a leftist or anything. It was like
Mm.
so, and he was expelled from these think tanks and these what they call them green tea parties and things like that. I don't know, like from these far right groups in America. He was expelled immediately, because they couldn't tolerate what he was saying. And Anthony Sutton, in the end, it was like quite a well, um, just he died a bit like uh, in oblivion, by the rest of like he was not considered an intellectual, was just close to a conspiracy theorist, even though his books were well substantiated, had like
I
plenty of
didn't, I
evidence.
didn't, didn't know these details, but I'd heard of him, but I
Yeah, no,
didn't.
he was amazing. He just exposed that, like even John Reed, John Reed, who was a journalist who went into the Soviet Union. Well, he was like during the Russian Revolution. He was a like he wrote this book, 10 days that moved the world. 10 days that shook. 10 days that shook the world or shocked the world. I don't remember.
Mhm.
Um, and he said that this guy got millions from Wall Street, like 8 million rubles, at the time, which is a lot of money, just to spread the ideas of the Russian Revolution and stuff. Like he was the only American that is buried in the Kremlin.
Right.
And so basically, what I always thought, and Sutton also proposes, is that both the Soviet Union and China were a pretext to just industrialize countries that were preeminently agricultural, in origin. Like the Soviet Union was like peasants were like 90% of the population, 98% of the population at the time of the Russian Revolution, and so was China, were like countries that were based on like agriculture. So what I believe is like they needed to like because in theory Marxism was invented for countries such as Germany, like Marx when he wrote Das Kapital, he was thinking more of like Germany, like industrial Germany. At that
Mm.
time, it was an industrialized country, and when you have Rose Luxemburg, and all the like during Weimar's Republic and all these things, what they were trying to do is just a revolution in Germany, just to just follow with the principles of Marxism, but
Yeah.
instead they applied it to very, very agricultural countries, which doesn't add up because Marxism is all about the means of production, and the factories and everything. But there were barely any factories in like pre-communist China. It's like more like a
Mm. Yeah,
rise.
exactly.
So I think it was a
Mm.
pretext to industrialize countries like very, very quickly. Like in century that it took. It's like fairly quickly, and they did similar to what you're describing because they like common land. They just gave them deeds, the deeds to own the land, and by owning the land, they could sell it. So, but
Yes.
basically, they started taxing on them and stuff. And where before it was free to use that land because it was communal, they didn't have to pay any taxes or anything. Now they had to pay taxes for like the property, like the similar as in England, you need to pay loads of property tax and stuff. So basically, because they lower the price of like the produce, so when they sold it in the open market, they just dumped the prices, so they couldn't sell it at the right prices to keep paying up with the taxes and the property taxes and everything. Eventually, they were forced to sell, and they sold to like big companies such as Nestle, like a multinational, similar to what Chomsky wrote with the subject of the corporations, like the psychopaths and stuff. So I think, and that's what I was trying to bring together because we also discussed, Spartacus, like this,
Mm.
this character, which was like obviously, this Marxist, the original one, like Rose Luxemburg. She created the Spartacist League. She was like
Yeah.
she's a reflection of a Spartacus. And you mentioned something very interesting the other day that you thought that Jesus and Spartacus were conflated, into a character. Like
Yes, I do. I do believe that. I believe that it was Spartacus that was crucified, and that Spartacus had been inspired by the teachings of Jesus. That God loves everybody, that you don't need to be a wealthy, because I think that people need to understand that until Jesus, really, it was commonly understood by the people, the peasantry, wherever a power structure, like the Roman nobility was taken over, that it was commonly believed by the peasantry that only the rich people would go to heaven. Only the pharaoh was going to go travel to Orion. The peasantry would go into a kind of underworld and still be the same servants and whatever they were in life. And so Jesus was a revolutionary character because what he did was he explained to people that no, it's that understanding that your heart will be weighed with the feather. You know what I mean? As to like how you had lived according in your life, as to whether or not you can be forgiven, whether or not, what kind of a person have you been? Have you been an evil person, somebody, lying, thieving, raping, murdering, whatever, with no conscience, behaving like an animal, basically? Or have you been living like a human being? And yes, human beings make mistakes, human beings can do wrong things sometimes. And so Jesus presents a very loving, understanding God in the form of Yahweh, who is prepared to forgive people. And I think, a classic example of this is, say, the story of Jonah. You see, where you've got the people of Nineveh who are living outside of the law. So they're behaving criminally in God's eyes. They're committing all kinds of crimes and sins. And so God says that Jonah should go and give a prophecy to the people of Nineveh that terrible things were going to happen to them because they had abandoned God's law and they were living in sin, you see, because that's what sin is. Sin is crime. So let's remove the word sin and let's replace it with the word crime, okay? Bring things into a modern day context. They were living in crime and corruption. And so Jonah doesn't want to do this prophecy. He says, no, I'm not doing this prophecy. And God insists that he does it to the extent that, he ends up in the belly of a whale until as being rescued by this whale because he tried to escape from God's command to go and give this prophecy. Anyway, after he's saved by the whale, he realizes that, yes, this is God. Sorry, this is the doggy Suki. Shh. So he goes and gives this prophecy, and then the people of Nineveh immediately repent and beg forgiveness of God and say, please, God, forgive us. We're not going to live like this anymore. We're going to do good. We're going to re-establish the law. We're not going to live like criminals. And so then God says, okay, God forgives them, and the prophecy doesn't happen. And then Jonah, understandably, is really angry and really upset because God's insisted that he gives this prophecy, and then, oh, the prophecy doesn't happen. What happened? So why did you make me give a prophecy that doesn't come true? You know, like, you insisted I give this prophecy and now it hasn't happened. So what was that about? And so God says, look, why do you look so downcast? Because it's good. The people heard the prophecy because they believed in me so much, in Yahweh so much. They begged forgiveness and they've stopped doing their bad things. So the prophecy doesn't need to happen. You know, this is a good thing. So this says, this is like mind-blowing. This is like revolutionary. This is like explaining to people who right now are clinging on to revelations. I mean, you've got Israel out there, these Zionists out there, and these evangelists, and all these extremist groups from various faiths in the Middle East going on about revelations and look, the prophecy says this, look, it's all happening, this prophecy is coming true. You know, I mean, anybody reading Revelations, it's just horror upon horror upon horror. You know, I mean, right down to the part where it's talking about Jesus. I mean, it doesn't say directly Jesus. It calls the Messiah is surrounded by 144,000, is it, or 140,000 men who were considered pure because they never knew a woman. Well, I mean, how does that make a man pure because he never knew a woman? What about if he'd known children, for example, in that same biblical sense? Supposing these 144,000 men were all paedophiles, but they'd never known a woman, so that makes them pure? You know, I mean, when are people going to start asking the questions? And then it's like in that same passage, it refers to this Messiah as the morning star, which was traditionally the name for Lucifer, you see. So Lucifer then gets to reign, does he? This whole revelation, I then discovered, was actually not written by St. John the Apostle, as it has been accredited to. It was actually written by Cerinthus, a Greek Gnostic who was a misogynist and who I believe hated Jesus. And according to one source that I read, I think St. John the Apostle did actually know this Cerinthus in person and referred to him as the deceiver of all mankind. And that prophecy, Revelations, is only in the Bible, in the New Testament, because Rome insisted. It was actually voted down. It wasn't going to be included in the Bible. You know, they refused the Book of Enoch to be included when Rome was rewriting Christianity, when it had usurped Christianity. And they decided to include this very dubious Revelations written by what I would say was an anti-Christian and a complete misogynist, you see. And there are certain things, you know, like, as I say, when I write my thing, I will be pointing out certain parts of that as to why I feel absolutely 100% sure, well, let's say 99.9% sure, that this is the case. But Revelations is being used as a blueprint now for what this so-called New World Order, WEF, Great Reset, you know, it's all based on these foundation stones, these stepping stones of history, and people buy into it. People
Yeah,
actually believe it.
I have a
And
question for you about that because this is one of those cases that what was first, whether the egg or the chicken or the hen. So in
yeah,
this case, what do you think came first? You know, like
you mean, do I think Revelations came first, or
no, whether Revelations was on purpose was written to
oh, I think
set
that,
up
yeah,
the, you know, to set up.
I think that Revelations was written. I mean, it is an absolute plagiarism of the Old Testament prophecies, and you can see them absolutely reflected in as you read through Revelations. I think that it was there to keep a cloud of doom and gloom over humanity, over Christians, that ultimately, what was coming was this horror and the end of the world. And, so, and people have lived under that weight of doom and gloom for how many centuries? Just like no matter what happens, imagine when the plague was happening and people genuinely believed that this was Revelations, this was it. People were waiting for the Messiah to arrive then because it was happening. Bring out your dead.
Have
uh
you heard? Have you heard of the Conspirators trilogy?
no.
Well, it's three like amazing books. It's a bit, uh, it's like it's a bit mockery of conspiracies and stuff, but it's like quite rather old. This is from the 80s or 70s. It's a trilogy, and it's all quite interesting because it goes like touches on many subjects. It's like a dystopian kind of novel, because it's a dystopian future. Uh, like there's like for instance this syndrome called node. Like people if they see instead of Ford, they see if node, FNORD, they just go into like they cannot continue reading. It's like a mind control programming. But the funny thing about the conspirators trilogy is like there are these characters who are Indians. They're called Indians because they are like characters from the end of times. Like, and they actually want the end of times. They just want for it to be over. So when I see all this Extinction Rebellion, and when I see these people who want to go and put the thing on, and they support all these measures, I remember of those Indians, and also a bit like Christians who are like they like the Book of Revelation, and they just longing for the end. I cannot help but just to have that feeling that like the book was true, and they're like such thing as Indians, like people who are like they belong to the end of times. It's like as we approach the end of times, these Indians start flourishing. It's like it's a thing of the Matrix. They start blooming, and then they long for the end. They just bring it about because they want it. They pretend that they want to live, and they're scared of death or whatever, but secretly they just want for everything to be over. And they will do everything. It's quite interesting. Like what are
Oh,
your
I
thoughts?
believe, yes. So a sort of nihilistic
Yeah.
kind of consciousness. I mean, yes, I think that there are people who would take down society. I think in humanity, as Jesus said, the afflicted will always be with you, and by that, I do believe that he was talking about the afflicted as in terms of mental health issues, as and I'm not talking about people who are feeling depressed or people who are suffering from things like PTSD or stuff like that. I'm talking about people who are what you would call psychopathic, sociopaths, narcissists. They're the afflicted in the sense that they are blind. They're intellectually blind because they have no access to emotions. They have a limited access to conscience, compassion, and care. You see,
Mm.
So these people are blind intellects because they don't understand why people care about each other. They don't understand conscience. They don't understand compassion. To them, all these three things make a person weak. And if you look at Rome, for example, Rome was established by two brothers, Romulus and Remus, who were raised by wolves. Okay, so basically, what you've got there is a consciousness that's been developed coming from a wolf pack, where the females, you look at the dynamics of a wolf pack, and the pups come last, the females last, and it's all about the alpha male and his female. He'll choose an alpha female, but then he might choose another alpha female, or there might be battles of who will be the alpha male. And but the pups in the wolf pack are, right down at the bottom of the line as far as power's concerned within the wolf pack. The wolf pack is dominated by the alpha male. And that is exactly what was established in Rome. And Rome was one of the first nations that literally stripped women of all rights. Women had no rights. And so, like, the male, as the head of the household, was entitled to kill his wives if he wished, to kill even his sons. And that was another thing that we discussed, was the worship of the Mithra in Rome, which was a Persian man who was born on the 25th of December, allegedly, 25th of the 12th month. And he married his own mother, so he became his own father. And this is where you get this trilogy from: the God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost. And so, and I looked into the psychology of why it was that this guy became so popular in Rome, and that they did worship him. It was a big thing, the cult of Mithra. And I think it was because I think it prohibited for a father to kill his son, you see, because because the son, because the Mithra placed the son as equal to the father, you see, that by the son marrying his own mother. I'm not sure if the Mithra had actually killed his own father and married his own mother.
That would just
I can't
be an
remember.
analogy. That would be an analogy to these two like two myths of the Greek mythology, like Oedipus and Electra.
Yes,
In
yes,
Oedipus, you have the story of. Well, the funny thing is, like, well, Freud used that because Freud. And I have a colleague who has this thought, like there are archetypes in his stories, right?
yeah,
And there's an entire art in extracting archetypes from stories. So in a way, like mythology was considered to be more advanced than philosophy, because mythology, everything was like a parable. Like Jesus, he made parables. Well, that's what mythology is all about. It's like parables,
hmm,
right? And then Freud extracted the parable from like the story of Oedipus. Like Oedipus didn't intend to kill his father. That's not how it goes. But he went to the oracle, and the oracle told him that was going to be his fate.
yeah,
Therefore, he by trying to avoid his fate, right? Because he was trying to avoid killing his father, but he didn't know who his father was because he was
yeah,
adopted. It's called Oedipus because he was left to his own devices in the desert. And it's
yeah,
called Oedipus. Oedipus means swollen feet, and it's swollen feet because when you are apparently when you are starting to dehydrate, the extremities, they become swollen. So that hence Oedipus, that's the name. Oedipus means swollen feet. And when he was found, he was adopted, and he thought his real parents were not the same as the actual ones. Like he was confused. So by when he went to the oracle, the oracle didn't specify, look, not your parents that you think these are your parents, but your actual parents, the ones, your actual father is the one who you're going to kill. So by trying to avoid killing his own father, he ends up killing his real father. So that's the
Yeah,
tragedy. But
that's the
Freud,
tragedy.
yeah, but Freud extracts this piece of like secretly every male, um, every male child has intrinsically this hidden desire to kill his own father and to lay with his mother. Like that is what Freud came up with.
Well,
And
you
and
know,
and they,
yeah, go on. I'll let you finish.
no, and similarly, they have the Electra complex, which is like female. They have this secret. Well, they fall in love with the father. They use the father as a pretext. So those are like the Freudian, complexes. He is extracted from mythology. Like
Yeah.
Freud, very interesting guy. Like he was Jewish. Like I'm pretty sure you know this. Um, one of his favorite paintings is a very famous painting. The Carthage and Rome. They were enemies,
Mm,
right? Well, Hannibal, he was like the Carthaginians' hero, and he swore eternal hatred to Rome. It's like really
mm,
strong, like eternal hatred to Rome. And there's a
yeah,
painting called that. It's Hannibal swearing eternal hatred to Rome, and he
yeah,
had that painting on top of his chimney, and he did that because, like to him, he hated Europe with a passion. Europeans, because he saw Europeans to the Jewish people similar to what Carthage would have seen Romans to
yeah.
the Carthage to the Phoenicians. Really. So it was quite interesting. But yeah, yes, I'll let you continue with that. Just
Well,
the
I was just going to say that, you know, Freud, I've looked at Freud. I do actually prefer Jung to
yeah,
Freud.
yeah,
I think Jung's much more on the ball and a lot more accurate, actually, in terms of his understanding of human psychology and consciousness, especially in terms of the collective consciousness. I think Freud is very much a man of his day. I mean, his Jewishness, in terms of like true Judaism, which I think, like true Christianity, has been very, very much obscured for a very, very, very long time. By the time that Freud was around, to the degree that, I think Freud first and foremost was an upper class European, you see. And so coming from that mindset, it's quite an exclusive kind of consciousness that he was born into, as far as wealth, education, and privilege that were not available to the general populace. Because don't forget, the bulk of the people were peasants, working in their cottage industries, and then you had the what you would call the ruling classes, the intelligentsia, whether they'd be, your lower middle class intelligentsia, educated people studying this or that. But nonetheless, they are of a different consciousness to the bulk of humanity, you see, because they are the ones that write the books, that put the things in motion, that sit in the seats of power, whether it's through money or through learning, that they're the ones that control the law, that operate the law, that control the people that will mete out the law, you see. And so Freud, I think it was a very misguided. I'm not saying he was wrong in everything. I think some things, that he put forward are interesting, but when I've looked at them, they only actually apply within the context of his society of his day, based on the common understanding of history that prevailed for his class of his day, you see. And I think, and so therefore they have no relevance to the vast majority of people, whereas Jungian understanding does have a relevance to the vast majority of people, because he cuts through the class divides and he recognises that class division, you know, because we are all essentially living under the auspices of the Roman blueprint for power. And the first foundation of that is divide and rule. And the first division is between the male and female. If you can disempower the female, then you have robbed humanity of a patriarchy, you see. Because a patriarchy will always be fathers from every background, whether it's peasantry, upper classes, whatever. A patriarchy, a fatherhood, genuinely connected to their children, who loves their children. A fatherhood that has never known this idea that you can degrade a woman and rob a woman of all her rights and turn her into a slave by marriage or by sociology, you know, like she's born a slave. And the idea that a child can be considered a minor human being, which we've discussed in previous videos, that legally you can define a child as a minor human being, which means an unimportant, insignificant triviality of life. And again, we go back to Rome, because Rome was quite unique, that a father was not allowed to mourn the death of a child under the age of 3. It was against the law. And then if the child was 3 years old, he was allowed to mourn for 3 days. And he was allowed to mourn as many days as years that the child was that died, you see. So, you know, this, again, this whole idea, it again goes back to the wolf pack, Rome, the wolf pack. That was Rome. That's the mentality that they took. And people, even today, point to Rome. You see these historians saying, oh, you know, Rome, their technology, and they were so powerful because they had the technology. No, what they did was they usurped every society, every people, everywhere, and they stole all their own technology, their weapons, and they improved on them with their collective, which anybody can do that. But because when you look at the mentality behind these innovations, you can see that they haven't ultimately achieved anything very good, because they ultimately serve the powers of the same psychology that usurped these peoples in the first place. And, you know, like, for example, with all this technology, they go into America and they subjugate the native people of America, North and South America. When the European people decided to invade that place full on, you know, with Christopher Columbus around that time, which we know he didn't discover them. He didn't discover the Americas anyway, you know, but it was decided then, because they had the power at that point to fully invade America. It wasn't that they didn't know America existed before then. I mean, that's just absolutely ridiculous. Of course they knew America was there, but it was just at that time they had the power, because they had the guns, they had the weaponry, they had the cannons, and now they could do it. But in previous times before then, they did not have the power to be able to invade America and occupy that place as an invading force and take ownership and control of the lands in the way that they could do from the time of Christopher Columbus. And I think people need to start getting a bit savvy about, look, sorry, forget the newspaper headlines, the media headlines, which we know are largely fake news, right? That's how it has been throughout history, is that we have been fed fake news, like the Enclosure Acts. It wasn't Enclosure Acts, it was Privatisation of Common Land Acts, you know, because nobody has a right to own the common lands. The common lands were for the people. That was our social security. That was why after World War II, the people of Britain insisted on social security, because we knew we were never going to get our common lands back, and we couldn't go back living to those times of weaving our own socks and what have you, because, we'd been robbed of that kind of knowledge. And anyway, we had machines to do that for us now. What we were saying was that, no, because everything those machines produce and the profits they make should be coming to us, we the people, because that was our technology to begin with, and all you've done is improve upon it. But it is against the law to then turn us into slaves and rob us of our right to live, to make us dependent on money. Because before enclosure, didn't just, or privatisation of common lands didn't just rob people of the power to farm and have common lands to grow food, to subside on. It also robbed people of the right to barter, you see, because it forced people to be dependent on money. Because most villages in Britain, like I say, 80% of the population lived in rural communities, and everybody lived by barter. People didn't need money. People would like, well, I'll make you some shoes, you bring me some jam, you do this, you do that. People largely lived and survived in that way, I'm not saying it was a perfect way of life, but that was how the majority of British people lived. And so, and it is very interesting as well that the Boers in Africa,
North Africa,
they wanted to get the African men to go and live hundreds of miles away and work the diamond mines. And they could not get these men to go and work in the diamond mines because they were that far away, and these men didn't want to leave the women behind. And African women at that time owned most of the land. They farmed it, they made all the produce, and they looked after the men. In fact, the African women, it was a matriarchy. Africa had its matriarchy and a patriarchy, you see. Because it had a matriarchy, it had a patriarchy, because that's what makes the patriarchy the matriarchy. A man can only become a father when he has created a mother. Do you see what I mean? When there's a mother of his child there, then he is a father. So Africa had a patriarchy because it had a matriarchy. And the matriarchy looked after the males. The women looked after the males. They had everything they wanted. The women made the food, they grew the food, made the clothes, everything the men wanted. And the men used to go off hunting from time to time, and they'd, have their warriors and do their own thing. That was the way African society worked. And the men were like, well, why should we leave our women? They weren't interested in money. So they asked Britain, and again, I learned this at at university, and there was quite a consternation in the lecture, because it was a black lady who was teaching us, was giving us this particular lecture, and she explained how the Boers had asked Britain for help to get the African men into the diamond mines, and that Britain had responded by giving the African Boers the blueprint to enclosure. Okay, so that's what they did. They privatised the land. They made the women work on the land for the plantation owners, and they could only grow food on the very edges on the poor, impoverished soil. And so then they had to work for money, and they introduced shops that women had to go and buy the food from the shops, but they weren't giving the women enough money to buy the food. So the only way to get more money was for the men to go and work in the diamond mines hundreds of miles away.
Well,
and
that's forcing them.
And so the men go and work in the diamond mines hundreds of miles away. And while they're there, they set up brothels and gambling dens. And so by the time the men come home, they have no money to give to the wives. And this is where you get this cycle of poverty that continues to this very day, wherever such practices have happened in the past, you see. So
yeah,
that was how this is how they use this as a blueprint. So I think that it was used in exactly the same way in Britain as to how to get control of a population by making them dependent on money, and then replacing that with a system of benefits, which was the social security system. It still hasn't worked, because all it did was put people on benefits. And now they've made it in Britain so virtually everybody who's working is on some sort of a benefit, because it's now benefits for employers. It's like they're actually, wages are so poor that the government has to pay people money to rent their home, because otherwise their wages don't pay them enough. This is how ridiculous it gets. But people carry on with it because they're so dependent on the money. So the poor people can't do anything. But I remember in that lecture when this black lady, this lecturer, was explaining this to us about the enclosure blueprint given to the Boers and how it worked, getting the men into the diamond mines. And I said, well, that was a conspiracy then, wasn't it? You see, because throughout my time at university, at Polytechnic and university, whenever I'd mentioned the word conspiracy, it's like, oh no, the conspiracy theory was disproven in 1977 or something by so-and-so. There's no such thing as conspiracy. History is just a process, an accidental whatever happening. And I said, well, that was a conspiracy then. That was a conspiracy. And she agreed with me. She said, yes, it was. And oh my gosh, the whole room erupted as all these other students suddenly got really angry and were saying, no, there's no such thing as conspiracy. You can't say that. You can't say it was a conspiracy. But it was a conspiracy, you see. Conspiracies do happen. This idea, because somebody writes a paper how many years ago saying there's no such thing as conspiracy through history. No, history is entirely created by conspiracy. Of course it is, because it's written by a very small group of people, and it is compiled by a very small group of people who traditionally are coming from a very selective and exclusive mindset of experience, of understanding. And like before, you mentioned Marx, and I've studied Marx and Engels. That was one of the things that I studied in the gender and sociology aspects of my degree. And well, I came to the conclusion that Marx was the equivalent of what today we would call controlled opposition. And I looked at where Marx was coming from, and I did notice that he's very anti-Christian, he's anti-God. And I think that was the main thrust. In a way, what he did was he looked at Christianity, he looked at humanity, and he homed in on what it was that made humans human and called it sociology.
Yeah, I believe that there is a subjacent intent behind all this, which is like, in fact, Marx was all about materialism, and I believe like there's a struggle in this world between those who think the world is purely material, like a material realm, but just matter is the ruler, of all things. And there's these people who believe there's something else, like there's a spirit inside all of us, and they won't bend to the matter because they think the spirit is rules over the matter. It's a higher order, of magnitude. So I believe that a struggle is like just what they want is to reduce the human spirit to nothing. Just turn humans into just biological machines. It's like,
Well, they do.
yeah.
They do. I
Mm?
think that idea of, well, like I say, it is the Antichrist. I mean, I think we need to start understanding that the Antichrist is actually the anti-human. It's about a level of consciousness that is dissatisfied with the human body, as it were, the human being. They're dissatisfied with life. They have no faith in anything beyond their own experience and lives, and they are often psychopathic, have a lack of empathy, an inability really to appreciate love and respect, and they have desires and they feel inhibited by law, by people's what Jesus called righteousness. You see, there's this sense of righteousness. So, righteousness prevailed in Britain, in Celtic Britain, in the form of there was a general sociological understanding that children were considered pure and were given the same respect as today we might give to a priest. Okay, children were really considered pure, special, beyond any limits that you might put on certain people. Children were out of the mouth of babes, which is quite the opposite of what the Romans imposed through their Romanized form of Christianity, which was saying, children are all born in original sin and they're evil and they need the devil beating out of them. And again, that is this idea that it says in the Bible, spare the rod and ruin the child. The rod is actually the law. The child is humanity. The rod is the law. Spare the law, ruin humanity. Where there's no law, you're going to have crime. And the devil is a criminal. Okay. So that's, again, we need to remove the mythology speak of devil and replace it with criminal. The criminal mind. So the criminal mind that has no empathy, no compassion, no care, no conscience, wants to have sex with this woman. The woman isn't interested because this criminal mind has nothing to offer, really, because generally they're not creative. They actually rely on humanity to create. They rely on humanity to work. They're not hard-working, creative people. You see, they usurp. They're usurers. Do you see what I mean? They earn off what is already there. They're not original thinkers.
Yeah, they just copy and steal, because
That's it.
they're
Yeah.
unable.
They're interested with the revelations, but they want to big themselves up. They want to be something important. They want to be the leading light.
They just want to just rule without originality, without
That's right,
ingenuity.
because they want power, but they do nothing to earn that power. They're dangerous people, and that is what this is why our world today is in such a bad way, because we have these power structures that have been established since Rome, and they're producing people that then power is bequeathed to them. So just by the point of being born, oh, you're going to be a king because your father was a king, and you're going to be a king. But who is to say that this child is worthy to be a king? And how did this family achieve power in the first place? And so what good are they doing to humanity? And of course, they're going to come to the point where things are getting out of control, out of hand. They're going to lose their power because they actually aren't coming from any point of real truth through the line of history, except a pack of lies and myths and what have you. And then it comes to the point, oh, all right, then we're going to have a great reset. Let's kill 6 billion people and set up our little utopia. I mean, they are that crazy to try and do that.
Yeah, no, but it's like, this is something I always try to say, and also I will just link it to common law as well. Right? I think uh, up to the point where where they build the pyramids, they need people. It's just to build them. They need workers, to build the pyramids.
Yeah.
But once the pyramids are built, they no longer need the workers. So what are they going to do with them? They call them cruel. I mean, they cruelly call them free riders. Um, like they are just useless eaters. All these things they call them. So they want to get rid of them. So that is something that has been happening every turn of a revolution. Like, I mean, I'm talking about industrial revolutions. The first industrial revolution saw loads of people, like you were mentioning, from like peasants and stuff from the countryside killed because some of
Mm.
them they moved into the cities, but the change was so sudden and so strong, so shocking, it killed them. Like impaired their capacities, like to survive or to reproduce, because they couldn't afford to have a family if they were living in like really unhealthy and horrible conditions.
Yeah,
So I believe first industrial revolution. I mean, I don't have the numbers, but I'm pretty sure if you start pulling from a thread, eventually you will find that loads of people were killed, were massacred, you know. And I think that is true for every other revolution. Like now, we're going into the, like they call it, the fifth industrial revolution, where they're going to replace the workforce with robots. That's the whole point. They just want to basically automate every process, including the production. They just don't need workers anymore. They just need like one person to maintain those machines. The robots. Well, not one person, but just maybe 10 people to maintain an entire field of automatic harvesters and trucks and stuff. And tractors and whatever. So I believe they don't have use for us, and because they hegemonic, they believe they have um, they rule over people, and they believe they have a say in people's lives and stuff. This is what this is the same as every other industrial revolution, right? It's just the fifth. We need to get rid of these people because we don't have a use for them anymore. We while we were building all the roads and the bridges and the airports and the internet connections and the copper wiring and everything, we needed them. But now we don't have it. So that's where they start talking about universal income, which is funny that in England they call universal credit to the next, like there was tax credits, then they replaced it with universal credit, which was a disaster and killed loads of people because indirectly, because people, instead of getting paid in advance, they were getting paid after like 1 month or
yeah.
something. People fell in arrears. That caused that put them at a disadvantage. Like it was like in big numbers, that would mean that loads of families die. Because they commit suicide, they cannot afford to live.
150,000, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like the bedroom tax. I remember talking to people who were elderly. They didn't know how to get rid of the house or whatever, and they were punished by having like 5 bedrooms or whatever,
Yeah,
and living single or alone. And so, they caught them by surprise. So all these measures were intended, like or were they reviewed like a or they were getting all these pensions for be unable to work, because they have some kind of impairment, and so they reviewed the benefits they were getting, and they were deemed some people able to work. There was this lady, I remember, she was deemed able to work, and she said, "Well, I cannot work. I haven't worked," and they found her, they forced her into a job, and after 1 month, she died. I mean, I don't know if you heard the story, and that happened to many people. It's like
well, I've
it was a
heard lots of stories
genocide.
similar.
It was a genocide. They killed loads of people, and now, like with what do you think with all this fast, with the bug and all this stuff? Like, some
Yeah,
it must have been like the suicides have gone off the roofs, like with, because I'm pretty sure people have, like, they couldn't take it anymore, and they have done silly things, sadly. So this is all part. And now you mentioned, we were discussing before the stream, the war in Ukraine, how
mm,
they send the UK soldiers to Ukraine border, and they're just leaving the country unattended. But at the same time, they're bringing people from Afghanistan and the ISIL and Daesh into hotels, into like you've seen this, like I've seen hotels like all the Premier Inns and everything, especially
Yeah.
up north. If you go from the Midlands upwards, you will find that these hotels have been repurposed to take on like immigrants, but these immigrants are like really strong men, like military grade men,
Well,
like
10,000 from Ukraine, 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers. And we know, look, no matter what they say, we know that since 2014, since America and Canada, whoever it was investing in Ukraine, directly in the Nazis in Ukraine, to have this Ukrainian usurpation of Ukraine's democracy. Because, Ukraine was always part of Russia. Russia was always the dominant language in that area that we now call Ukraine. And the idea that you can start punishing people for speaking Russian in Ukraine is completely ridiculous.
yeah,
It is like suddenly saying Welsh is the only original language of Britain, and that everybody speaking English is
everybody.
isn't really British. Do you know what I mean? And that is exactly what they have done in Ukraine. And the British people need to understand it, and the people of Europe need to understand it. And we need to stand by the Ukrainian people, the majority of Ukrainian people. I'm not against Ukraine. I'm not even against these Nazis, really, because they've just been usurped and gathered. Because that's, if you put some bread and seeds on a bird table, the birds will come to eat. If you create a situation in a country where there's no money, there's no jobs, people are impoverished, which is what's happened in Ukraine, and America's certainly done its bit, and Britain, to make sure that's been the case. And you put in money, weapons, power, camaraderie, some sort of community there, that, if you come and join these Nazis, you're part of our gang, you get this money, you get guns, you get some power, you get access to young women, you can go and have fun hurting people. As they've said, they have fun killing. This is one of their spokespeople. We've all seen the videos. Yes, of course you're going to get them, but they're being used, they're being played, and when they've lost their use for them, they'll throw them away, just like they do with everybody else. And this is what people need to understand, that these are dangerous people that are controlling the world right now. They're not going to take the world in any good place. Technology is supposed to serve humanity. It isn't there to be used in order to eliminate humanity. The idea is that we evolve, we move forward into our, what I call, psychological evolution. And that has to be a conscious effort. It isn't going to happen while you're asleep dreaming. It has to be a conscious effort where we recognize that we are, all of us, universal beings. And we are a miracle. Our planet is a miracle. And all the life upon it is a miracle. And life is a gift. And we can make what we will off that gift. We can improve ourselves, so that we age more gracefully. We may improve our life standards so we live longer lives. But the thing is that we are never going to reach a level of happiness, a level of true happiness, a level of true appreciation of life, while ever we are living outside of the law. And all of these power entities that are in play right now are living beyond the realms of universal law. And any life form in this universe that lives outside of the law will perish. There is no doubt about it. These people will lead humanity to extinction. I mean, this idea, for example, if you take Revelations, the true law is universal law of abundance and compassion. I understood that from the message I received, as I've said, about my light being experiencing, witnessing that event of light being, and receiving that message through an energy of bliss, okay, is all I can describe it as. But I understood universal law of abundance and compassion is the law, and that upholds all our human rights. It upholds animal rights, it upholds earth rights, it upholds human rights, and especially children's rights. And children in that law, which, don't forget, children in this so-called law we're living under now, as I would call criminals law, okay? The law we're living under now, children have the least rights. They are minor. They are insignificant trivialities, okay, according to the law. But in universal law, every child is a VIP. It doesn't matter what the mum or the dad, what position they have in society. The child is a VIP. And that's where the law starts, you see. And this is the aspects of Revelations where you can see the plagiarism, you know, the first shall be last and the last shall be first. Because the children are the last, aren't they? And they will be first because they are first. And any society that cannot look after its children, that has no care for children, is not a lawful society. Britain is a criminal society because in Britain, the law states children are minor human beings. We are a criminal society, okay? And so this idea of civilization, you see, where is the civilization? There is no civilization. The whole point of what we're living in is that civilization has gone, because true civilization has a matriarchy and a patriarchy. We do not have a matriarchy and a patriarchy. We have an oligarchy, and this oligarchy is a self-centered. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Can I ask you, Deborah, because one of the viewers is asking, like, and I wouldn't define you as feminist. It's just like more
No.
you're like more like you are a humanist, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you're just like, because the viewer believes like he has, well, she herself, she got into feminism and she got dragged into LGBTQ and other things, and then she didn't quite agree with all that, so she was telling you, like, recommending to read her book, or
I would
how
love
she
to read
got
a
out
book.
of all that.
Yeah.
And so she was asking, like, but I just to clarify, I don't think you're a feminist per se, you
No,
know,
I'm
like.
not. When I was studying gender studies at university as part of sociology, I did run into some really bad situations with this women's study section, and because they did not like, because I queried them when they were telling us about, you know, how working men in Jarrow, you know, never help the women with washing the children or doing any cooking. And so I'd be like, well, they're working in a ship. I said, you know, it's okay for middle class women to come along and look at these working class men and say, oh, they're so sexist because, you know, the women are doing this, but they're doing that, and they aren't helping these women. It's like, look, they're working in a shipyard all day, or they're working down a pit all the hours God sends. And like what? So they're expected to come home and start bathing the children and doing this and that, which invariably a lot of them did if the wives were ill. You know, who else is going to do it? Or the elder children would be doing it. It's like, you know, I always questioned their, you know, just the way that they looked at men as the source of all the problems, where I have always seen, and I've had really bad experiences from men right from the start of my own father, who was a very misogynistic, racist, abusive person. Okay. But I recognized that that actually made me appreciate more the men out there, the bulk of men that I saw who were genuinely caring people, you know what I mean? And it's like, and that was one of the things that I explained in some of my work that I did that was so, you know, looked with disapproval by these feminists, because I was saying that, you know, men, we need to establish the patriarchy, because the whole course was like denigrating the patriarchy. And I was constantly saying, but there is no patriarchy. You know, that these aren't real fathers. This isn't a father thing that's governing us. It is an oligarchy. That's what's governing us. Because because a true father appreciates the mother, and the mother appreciates the father. They work together, and of course they have different ways of being, because one's a female and has to deal with a female level of being, and one's a male and has to deal with his male level of being. And I think when, like, for example, it came to a point with pornography, what people call pornography, and it was like, well, women should be able to wear what they want and blah blah blah. And it's like, yeah, okay, women can wear what they like, but then women do need, and women did traditionally respect, male sexuality, you see. And that male sexuality is a power of its own. And so that's why traditionally, apart from very hot, humid places, where wearing clothes can actually cause disease, because it's gathering germs and bacteria and what have you. But generally, women covered themselves up not to excite the men, And I always remember one program that I watched where this guy, he went and stayed in different tribes in South America, in the Amazon rainforest. And he came, like one tribe, they used to invert their penises. And he asked them why they did this. And he did it, and it was really painful. But these people have been doing it all their lives. So, they'd got used to it. It was part of their initiation rites into manhood. And they said it so they don't get erections all the time. To respect the women, you see. And it's that understanding, it isn't about prohibition. We're still living in the dark ages of this has to be prohibited, and anybody doing this, and this idea of punishment. It's like, oh, she's showing too much of her body, she should be punished, or he's doing this, he should be punished. It is just about respect. It's about understanding each other and respect, that a woman knows if she's got her tits on full display, then that is going to have an impact on the men. And the same as the man knows that if he's got his penis on full display, it is going to have an impact on the women. Like that sometimes we need, I think sexuality is being used to exploit men, in that the men think that they're the beneficiaries of this free sexuality of pornography. You put your Facebook on and there's a naked woman promoting marijuana at the top of the screen, right? This is what's on my Facebook. I put it on, I see full frontal nudity with marijuana blasted across the top of it. Okay. And that is is that for me, or is it for men? But if you can distract men continually with nude figures, then that's it. That's half the male consciousness. Where is it? Where is it?
Also, I think it denigrates women because, by constantly planting in the mind of men that women are just there for them to satisfy their primary instincts instead of just as companions, as just equals, as like that.
But women have been taught to see it as a form of power, haven't they? This idea, the Spice Girls, that's what they were used to launch, this idea of pussy power. That there's some sort of power of being young and beautiful and attractive, which there is, but that this can be exploited to make you very rich. And that is a legitimate form of wealth.
At the moment, I think we're witnessing the greatest divide between the youth and the elderly has ever been. I feel like the war is on. Like young people despise. They call them boomers. Which is a misnomer because boomers are only born like after the war and before. But they call everyone who is like older in their perception boomer. And there's like a battle on the internet between boomers and millennials and all the stuff, and they hate each other.
Nonsense. It's,
But yeah,
I mean,
I
that right from the start when they started referring to boomers and the millennials. And it's like, look, just go away. Divide and rule, divide and rule, divide and rule. Rome, go
Exactly.
away. We see right through you. Your tricks are not going to work on us anymore. Human beings are going to stand up no matter what age we are, and we're going to stand together, and we are going to get through this period, and this consciousness has been avoiding its day of judgment for a very long time. They think because as the judgment comes, as happened in France, and there was a revolution that gets usurped by all the usual suspects, and they try to re-establish the old order. As I've always said, this new world order that this lot want to establish, it is not a new world order. It's an old world order, and they want to re-establish it, but this time with 21st century technology. And what's happening in Britain is that they're not taking us back to Victorian Britain. No, they're taking us back to pre-Cromwell Britain. They are going back to the 16th century with their new technology.
I'm not sure if that would be because I think Cromwell did more evil than he did good.
Oh, yes. I mean, of course.
And he killed loads of Catholics in Ireland.
He
Like
did, yes.
with the famine,
With
and
his
like with
Puritanism.
Parliament. Yeah, I think is that more than like with the MPs that we have nowadays and everything. I think it's a lot to do with Cornwall. It's like I feel like that stupid parliament after
Yeah,
they killed the
yeah,
king. It's like if you remember I think it was Richard Burton, wasn't it? Like I don't remember who's like the actor, but or it was Peter. I don't remember. There was a fantastic movie about Oliver Cromwell, and I remember like the speech to Parliament as calling them idiots, which was factual, like and he dismissed the Parliament, and stuff, and he called them
yeah.
retards and stuff because um he thought like even the king had like the movie tries to put it as he was remorseful of killing the king, and then he saw like all
I
these
mean, I think
clowns.
that was terrible that they killed the king. I mean, I can't say I had any particular feeling for the king, like, was it King Charles?
Charles the second.
Yeah, that he was a very good king. I think he spent
I
lots of
think he
money
was
on
good.
clothes and stuff.
I,
But
I, I
it's
think
like, I
I
think
think just very quickly, his role during the Civil War was correct, because there was a civil war, and he
mm,
just tried to defend his throne.
yeah,
It was
yeah,
his. I mean, if he hadn't done that, actually, he would be a traitor. What he did was correct.
yeah,
And in fact, during his trial, he said, "Well, first, this trial is a farce because I'm a king, and
yeah.
by law, like I only render accounts to God. I don't render accounts to Parliament. So to know, and that's accurate. That defense is
Well,
legally sound.
according to the context of the law that he's talking in, and that is what I mean. A lot of these history, we get caught up into these little battles of, yes, in the context of what was going on in those times. I think the law was more on the side of King Charles than it was on Cromwell. And I've got no love for Puritanism. I think it's evil actually, with all of its prohibition and everything. Creates more problems than it claims to solve. But I think when you look at it in terms of universal law, all of them were equally bad. It's like, because the king is living outside of the law anyway, because the king is supposed to be there making sure that the people, the leaders, are supposed to be there to uphold universal law of abundance
But
and compassion,
but
to
the
make
rule
sure that
just
resources
just
are distributed as evenly as possible.
just to clarify a bit the role of a monarch in those days. Like the role, because people have try to understand it from the modern perspective. Like the accusations that he was a corrupt or he was enriching himself. That's quite modern. That's probably it's been planted afterwards, after the fact. I don't think that was the actual reproach they made to the king at that time, that he was trying
No,
reaching himself or whatever. That's what they use. Like your husband was Iranian,
yeah,
like the Shah of Persia. That's another thing they used against him. They say he was like
yeah.
enriching himself, but I don't think that was true, and I don't think I don't think it was true for Charles II either. I think a king doesn't need to corrupt himself with because he's a king. So
Yeah,
the point of the king being outside the law is so he can be the law himself. He can rule. It's like Solomon. I think it's been the role of kings has been mistaken, because I think it's more like judges. Just like people who are like they're really fair and neutral. So they are
mm,
really good at finding justice in things. So that's why it was so important that during the Middle Ages, just the kings, the role of the king was just to impart justice, just to tell right from wrong, like, and if you see every European monarchy, the king was the authority. It was just like you didn't need a constitutional, I mean, you had the constitution in the UK, but you didn't have a constitutional tribunal, a constitutional court of human rights or whatever. You just
yeah,
plus there's another thing. Human rights. You don't need a charter of human rights. Human rights are given in theory by God. We all have them.
yeah, exactly.
By
They're
say,
part of life.
yeah, by saying there's a charter of human rights, you're putting the onus on the humans to give them. But that's not true. We are born with human rights. No one can take them away from us. It's like it's not that humans gave us the rights. God gave them to us. And
Well, that is the prime purpose of a monarch, or it ought to be, of any leadership, is to uphold, to make sure that human rights are upheld, to make sure that civilization prevails. You
exactly,
see, but
exactly.
we are living in the remnants of an era of human existence where we've been conditioned to believe that civilization is the result of building physical buildings. You
Mm-hmm.
see that this somehow represents civilization because you've got physical buildings and you've got people occupying these physical buildings on behalf of a physical power.
Yeah.
And it's all part of might equals right to do as thy will, which is the foundation of Luciferian law.
Aleister Crowley, with
Exactly.
the, the,
He
the, the whole of the
defined it.
laws.
The whole of the law is might equals right to do as thy will. But actually, the whole of the law, and this is the real law,
The
that
law of
right
abundance.
equals might to do as thy will. Are you right according to universal law? Or is what you're doing in context of human rights, animal rights, earth rights, universal rights? Okay, because life has a right to abundance in compassion, to thrive in abundance in compassion. And that's what earth provides. So if we go back to the Native American people and the invasion of the Europeans, when finally they realized they had the power to subjugate these people with the power of the gun and cannon, okay, that they went in with might is the right. You see, our might gives us the right to make you live with less so we can live with more. So a few of us can live with more. The majority of you have to live with less. And they keep that power structure and they satisfy a host of criminal desires of mostly males, okay, because they are the mightiest. It's rapist law.
Mm-hmm.
Might equals right to do as thy will gives a man a right to rape a woman,
Yeah.
or kill a woman, or rape a child. Because look, I'm bigger and stronger than you. I can do what I like.
Yeah, it's the law of the jungle.
And so what we're dealing with now is we are not living in civilization. This is not civilization. It never has been civilization since the first time that the Roman boot once again stamped its boot down on the face of Britain in the form of what's his name? I can't even think that. William the Conqueror. And he was working direct. He was hired directly by the Pope to subjugate Britain under Roman Christianity, because Britain at that time was under rule of Celtic Christianity, which was actually it was Druid faith that had incorporated Christianity into its faith, in exactly the same way that in Africa, the voodoo, which was very similar actually to Druid faith, but with African culture, because as I've explained in some of my writings, culture generally is derived directly from climate and the resources of the land from which that culture has developed. And so the voodoo had their faith, and they incorporated Christianity, and the Druids incorporated Christianity into their faith. And the Celtic cross is the original cross. Okay, that's the real Christian cross, because what it shows is reality, universal reality on earth.
Could it be that cross that represents the North Pole? Because in the old maps, the North Pole was represented by 4 masses of land, 4 continents, and there were 4 rivers going inwards, where they were going towards the North Pole. So I think because like you see Polish comes from the pole. They have these pole dances. They hold the rope and they dance around the pole. I think that there's some North Polish kind of culture going on with the Druidic tradition and that Celtic cross, which represents.
Yeah, so I think we could say that. I think at the time, though, the Celtic cross, it represents the 4 equinoxes.
That's interesting.
And the circle is the solar year. So you're talking about the 4 equinoxes within the circle of the solar year. And so it's 4 equinoxes through time. And so that's why they did understand that this is where humanity is born on the cross of life. Because without those equinoxes, without Earth's tilt and everything, it would be very difficult for life to thrive on Earth. It is the tilt and the balance of our planet that allows for life to flourish, creates these 4 seasons, and they are the equinoxes, and that is the cross of life, that we are all born and die on that cross of life. And the circle of time, you see, within the circle of time, which is a circle, it's not something that goes from A to B. It goes round and round and round. And the equinoxes are the stability within that circle. Okay, they are key markers of time for humanity, for when to plant our crops, when to reap our crops, when to store for winter, and the whole process begins again with the spring equinox. And so that's the real cross, you see. The crucifixion is actually a symbol of Roman torture.
Oppression, yeah.
It's a symbol of oppression.
Let me answer very quickly to the viewer who's saying the viewer is confusing what the Charter of Human Rights is. What I was saying is like the Charter. You don't need a Charter of Human Rights. Like you don't get the rights from the Charter. The Charter is the guarantor of those rights. It's a warranty. It's what grants you the rights.
To articulate those rights and how they apply within the context of the modern world, living within the structures of work and life that we're living in now. So where you've got a host of factories, then how do you transpose those rights into people working in a factory? Well, they've got to have so many breaks, they've got to have holidays, they've got to have this, they've got to have that. But actually, the fundamental thing is that people have human rights. And so people have human rights that include the right to shelter, for example. Well, how do you define shelter in a country that has freezing cold winters and you've just made the cost of fuel so expensive that people are actually freezing to death in their own homes?
Yeah, that's the second part of the viewer's question, because there's, well, if the country is not democratic, like say Saudi Arabia, then there's no point in human rights. But that's wrong. It's like, even if the country is not democratic, uh, it's like the human rights are not magical. They're not going to prevent people from trespassing against them. What it's going to do is, if those people are ever brought to justice, they will give the grounds to judge those people. They will give, and they will draw the line that sets, the right from wrong. That puts those people who are violating the human rights on one side of the line that you draw, and the people whose rights are violated on the other side of the line. So it just,
Well, I'm not sure about democracy as being a forerunner to human rights. I think you can have a society without a democracy, in the sense of what passes for democracy exists today, but that nonetheless upholds human rights. Because as we've seen with Brexit, for example, in Britain, democracy can be thwarted, can't it? A democratic process whereby people are persuaded to chop their own feet off, and to take food from their own children's mouths, to dump a weight of debt on their children.
I think,
like, what kind of a democracy is that? Democracy, that there have to be some foundation for democracy to stand on. And if democracy isn't standing on the foundation of fully upholding human rights and a fair system of law, then there is no democracy.
Yeah, no,
is
I see what you mean.
Consent, haven't you?
Yeah, I see what you mean, Deborah. But there's a misconception that I've seen in England, that they believe that you can vote things that are against human rights, or they believe that you can vote things that are against common sense. Like, for instance, they believe that Brexiteers thought genuinely that you could just vote to have all the immigrants deported. If they voted for it, it would be democratic to do so. Or, like, if they, on this, but by the same token, if they all agree on that raping is legal, that you could just make raping legal. Well, that's
that isn't the purpose of democracy. That isn't a democracy. That is, like I say, it's manufacturing consent, and anybody can manufacture it.
There's nothing to do with democracy, because democracy, that's why, well, we're not in a democracy, because the original democracy was based on actual slavery. The Athenian democracy, like 20% of the people were citizens, the rest were metekos, which are like foreigners. They didn't have a vote, and they couldn't, like 80% were slaves, basically, or second-class citizens. So that's democracy. And then we are closer to Roman Republic, where you just, like, especially in the UK, where you choose the MPs, and the MPs are the ones who vote for you. They are the ones who decide for you, because you have voted them to decide for you.
Yes, exactly.
But that's why they are there, because they cannot vote ridiculous things like, oh yeah, let's legalize rape, or like, just like,
let's legalize denying people the right to winter fuel. Let's legalize the right to kick people out of their homes. I mean, it's completely ridiculous. But as I say, I think people are so lost. They're getting away with things that they would never dare to get away with in my grandparents' day. They would never have allowed a lot of things that have happened. But people are so distracted with their phones. I know so many young people who just don't listen to the news. They're not interested. They're too busy on social media. And it's too late. By the time they realise what's going on, it's too late. Like with Brexit, people like myself, so-called boomer, was out there warning people about, this is what is going to happen. And actually it's happened, and it's even worse than we could even think, but then we could think would happen, that most people would believe could happen. I was told that I was being a scaremonger, you see. I'm just a scaremonger.
Well, that's funny. That's rich coming from them because they were the actual ones scaring against immigrants. Like immigrants are stealing all
Yeah.
the
Oh,
jobs.
yeah, we were going to have a
Immigrants
million.
are going to collapse the NHS. Immigrants
Yeah.
are going to steal like all our services. Immigrants, that's scaremongering. So the ones who were actually like you see the Daily
That's
Mail,
how they do
the,
it.
the, huh?
That's how they do it. The Nazis
Projecting
originated that thing of like accuse your enemies
of what you
of,
do, you're
of
projecting.
what you are doing. Yeah, and that is what they do. They do it all the time. They're doing it all the time. And as I say, with this war in Ukraine, it wouldn't surprise me if Putin was every bit as much involved in it as, because it's a game plan.
Europe as the
It's a
NATO.
game plan to destroy Europe, to destroy the society of Europe, to destroy the power of the European people as a voice of reason, as a voice of conscience, as a voice of compassion instead. And you can see wherever the narratives are going, they're using this left-right paradigm to denigrate anybody speaking from compassion. Oh, you're a socialist, you're a communist. And anybody that's coming from a common sense, humane place, right? I'm not talking politically, whether it's left or right. Anybody with any true compassion, any true sense of humanity, anybody standing up for human rights, you're a leftist, you're a communist, and you can see the rise of the far right. The far right are taking power, and we're back to the situation before
I
World
wouldn't
War
call it.
II.
Sorry to interrupt, Deborah. I wouldn't call them far right. I would just call them populists.
Yeah,
Because I think I hear that it's like populists. It's people, demagogues, people who believe the easy traps. Like well, scapegoating immigrants. That's an easy trap. That's
yeah.
populism. Like demagogue.
But we can see they're doing that in every place, aren't they?
Exactly, Italy has fallen for it. You got Meloni and you got like a rejection of him, and plus it's true that with the Kalergi plan and everything, they flood the gates of Europe with immigrants. That's true. They're doing this, but by reacting against immigrants and victimizing them and criminalizing them or going against them, you're just following the plan of divide and conquer. They should just embrace them and help them, like go back to the countries if they wish to, and rebuild the countries, because most of these immigrants have been pushed by the same powers.
Yeah,
Like why are they not in
yeah,
Africa? They've been living for centuries in Africa, and suddenly they feel the urge to go to Europe. Why? It doesn't make sense. It's because they're pushing them with wars, with Boko Haram, with
yeah.
Daesh, with ISIL, and they're
Poverty.
pushing them. Yeah, and then they come to Europe, or sometimes they are brought by mafias with interest, or they are brought by the very powers that be, or that shouldn't they shouldn't be, but they
Yeah,
bring them into Europe, like for instance as mercenaries from Ukraine. Like probably as an occupation, a secret occupation or hidden occupation army, waiting for the right time to just go out and help with the martial law, because being foreigner, I know they won't feel
yeah.
compassion towards the citizens of the country. So for them, like imagine, like we were discussing this, like if there was martial law was declared in the UK, and they unleashed all these Ukrainian forces they've been introducing in the country, they wouldn't feel any empathy towards British citizens because they don't speak the
And
language.
exactly, that is exactly why they're bringing 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers into Britain every 120 days. I mean, if it push came to shove and they decide, all right, there's mass riots because we're starving people, there's no food, which I think after December, after this month, it's going to be very hard in Britain because the door is now closed officially to European trade, and because they've renegaded on the very poor Brexit deal that they made anyway. So, and people aren't aware of it because the BBC haven't told them, and So, like, suddenly things are going to get really tough. And then people will start to be out on the streets. And then who's going to subjugate those people? Well, not the British Army. They'll have, because they've brought in private security firms like Amentum.
Just for
So Amentum is a big multinational security firm, corporation that's opened, newly established in Britain. I think, was it last year or the year before, it acquired DynCorp, which is another multinational
massive.
corporation that's got its own military, its own planes, bombs, tanks, you name it. America's been using them, these contracting mercenaries, for work in Afghanistan, even in Yemen, all over the place, okay, in the Middle East. And there's all kinds of atrocities associated with them, but like they can't be brought to justice in the same way that a state military can, because these are private corporations. And so they've now bought DynCorp. DynCorp was established in Britain. Amentum has got a base in Britain, and Amentum, like DynCorp, is available to hire by governments who wish to establish whatever plan they've got forward, and they need help to do that. Well, here we go. Amentum's now got DynCorp. They can provide the soldiers. Well, who's DynCorp going to be hiring in Britain? All these newly nationalised Ukrainian Nazis who are well versed in martial law, because they've been running martial law in Ukraine now since 2014. You can go and see all the images of how they implement it. The people tied to lampposts, the women raped, the children, whatever, you name it. Okay. Under martial law, human rights are suspended. There's no democracy. The people have no rights whatsoever. The military can come into your home. They can seize your home. They can seize everything in your home. They can arrest you and put you in prison without any charges, without any trial, right? People do not realise this. This is terror, right? This is terror. And as I've written to my MP explaining all of this, and I've published the letter, I'll send you the link, okay, explaining all of this, sharing all the links of evidence to it, and explaining that this is not martial law. It will be a terrorist state. It is a threat of terrorism, that a threat of this government that has lied to the people, that has broken every rule in the book, that is living against human rights and even plotting to scrap human rights, which even expressing the intent to scrap our human rights is itself a crime against our human rights, because that's a threat. And any government that cannot support our human rights and is threatening us with martial law, then that's not martial law, that's terrorism, okay? So we are dealing with a criminal terrorist government that is basically a military coup. That's it. It's a military coup. And so it isn't martial law in the sense of like when they established martial law during World War II, which was to help keep the peace and to help make sure people were looked after, and bomb shelters are around and what have you. No, this will be a military coup. It will be that the coup, the political and economic coup that has been taking place since Brexit was first uttered from Parliament's lips, okay, to the point where it becomes a military coup. And that is the full takeover then, when they've literally got the British people lining up on the streets, waiting to receive their rations.
Well, I need to clarify for the viewer that you mentioned, because the viewer says like, well, this is all coming from the left or the far left.
I am not left or right.
No, but let me clarify, because the perception is different in Spain and England, because most of these tyrannical measures, we've been under the Tories for 12 years now. I don't remember, loads, it's been ages now with the Tories, and whereas in Spain they've been with the socialists, with the Labour for ages now. So for them, all these measures like they've been coming, like the Ukraine and stuff, from the left, whereas in here they've been coming from the right. So it doesn't really matter. Like for instance, being
No.
the Times, like a theory, a far, well, not far, but right wing newspaper. But if you get the Times and read it, you will find like loads of like all these agendas, Ukraine, feminism, all this stuff, but in a bad way, like and all these agendas they are flooding England with. So it's both. Like I call this left the new left or the fake left
Yeah,
because it's,
it isn't left. There is no left.
no,
There's no
the original
right,
left.
no left. It's just agendas and people getting money. And it's like, oh, well, you can call yourself a Labour politician, but actually you are implementing Thatcherite policies. You know what I mean? I mean, Tony
Exactly.
Blair called himself left. Is that left really? People
Yeah,
need
no,
to step out. It's like I say, step out of the divisions. There's only one divide in this world. Do you stand up for human rights or not?
yeah,
Okay?
that's what I was trying
You
to
stand
tell
by
to the
human rights. If you don't stand by human rights, then you are against the law. That's it. You stand against humanity. So
yeah,
do you stand with humanity? Do you stand up for human rights? Then you are a human being. Do you stand by your humanity? Okay, your right to live with care, compassion, consideration, respect. Or because without respect, there is no freedom. Without respect for the law, the only freedom that will be is for criminals, right? And that is
yes,
what they do. They use these left-right paradigms to break down people's human respect for human decency, the law, human rights. If you can get people to lose respect for our human rights, then basically they've won half the battle already. Once
exactly.
once they've convinced a person that, look, you need to mistrust this person, you need to dislike this person because their skin color. You see, look, they've got dark brown skin.
Yeah, it's like this viewer from Spain doesn't. It's because like she doesn't understand the points we are making because she hasn't seen the trajectory. Like for instance, for Spain, will actually might be good to leave the European Union because for Spain it's been very taxing. It's like a very expensive club, and
Yeah.
for Spain to pay the fees just to stay in the club might not be the best thing. Like keeps the prices very high. And other stuff. But for the UK, it was good. Like there was a lot
Yeah.
of markets open, people working, and all these Brexiteers like were mainly Northerners. Mostly, sorry, well, this is probably is true, like from Yorkshire, from all this.
Mm.
Well, they haven't seen an immigrant in their entire life. Some places, like in Yorkshire, there are places where you don't
Oh
see an
no,
immigrant. They don't.
Yorkshire's absolutely full of immigrants.
Oh, is
You
it?
know.
I
Yeah.
thought it was like well, it depends on the areas because I thought there were like there are area like I've been to Skegness and most people were British. Like I'm talking about North, or I've been to areas in Manchester and stuff where are complaining a lot about immigrants, but Manchester is like filled with council estates and so. But just imagine compared to the south, I think there are far less immigrants up north, but
I
might be
think there probably are more in the south. I mean, to me, I grew up in a multicultural community. I was one of, if you go just by colour of skin, I was one of about 4 white children in my classes at school. And, but I can't say that I was a minority because, when you look at, there was like 3 or 4, there'd be about 40 children in each class, and between 30 and 40 children. And out of those 30, 40 children, there'd be like, a few from Jamaica, a few from Dominica, a few from Barbados, a few from Europe, like Spain, Germany, even one from Canada. And then there was some from Asia. So you'd have like some from Hong Kong. Some children were from Sri Lanka, now Ceylon. Some people, or was it Ceylon now, Sri Lanka? I'm getting
Yeah,
mixed up
the
there.
other world.
There's some children from India, some children from Pakistan. Some children were Sikhs, some were Hindu, some were Muslim, some were Christian, some were Buddhist. It's like, and so I'd be friends with all the children, but then there would be a very lot of hostility between the children from Jamaica and the children from Barbados or Dominica. And then they together didn't like the Asian children, whether they're Indian or Pakistani. Some of the Indian and Pakistani children didn't like each other, you know. And then them two together picked on the one girl who was from Ceylon. Okay, I mean, that's how I grew up. And by the time the age of like 9, 10, which was the final year of primary school, we'd all started just playing together. We turned it into a game, like they used to call me white chocolate drop, or white ice cream, because we turned it into a game that none of these things applied, that they'd really tried to separate us. But us kids, we all just got on. We all made friends. And I remember a teacher getting really angry in class because the black children in particular, if an Asian child sat on a chair or used a pencil or picked a book up, they would have to blow on that before they used it or sat on that chair, like blowing germs off it, as if to say, these children have got germs. And it was really horrible. But, that's what was going on. And this teacher just went absolutely crazy and said, I am not allowing this in my classroom anymore, because all the teachers just allowed it. And she said, this is ridiculous. You've all got germs. And if you're going to blow on the things, and I think that was a turning point. That was when I was 7. I was 7 years old. I was in that class. And that seemed to be some sort of a turning point, that after that, it just stopped. I think this teacher, Mrs. Wallace, her name was. And I think that she must have done something, had words with the whole establishment of that school, because that whole thing just stopped, of like, because it was like, if you didn't do it, then you'd be picked on it. It'd be like, oh, you touched that pencil, you didn't blow on it because now you've got germs. You know what kids are like. And all it was the adult world, the children reflecting what the adult world was putting on them.
Yeah.
But I made friends with those children, and I can say that there was no difference. They were all deep down, most of them, just nice children.
Yeah.
That were indoctrinated with these things, and we got through it. Because I look at immigrants come to Britain, they work hard, they give something to our country. Our society has been enriched because of all these different cultures, the foods. Everybody goes out for a curry, don't they, in Britain? There's so many things that they've brought into our culture that we're not focusing on the positive. It's just people saying, oh, they're taking up NHS places. Well, campaign for a better NHS then. Why isn't your NHS being funded enough then to accommodate these immigrants that the government's bringing in? Why ain't it giving extra money to the NHS? Go and tell the government to give more money to the NHS. Don't turn around and expect us to evict these people who children have been born in Britain now, who are working for Britain. Don't expect to evict them. Go and ask your government to be giving, because the government's earning money off them, because most of them are working. It's
just to give a real example of how it is, like the importance of, like you said, the law of abundance and humanity and all these things. I remember, like, it was 2020. It was just the Christmas, or the New Year's Eve of Brexit when it got into place. And it was chaos. It was absolute chaos. Trucks were stuck going into Dover, and they even opened like presents to store the trucks, the lorries inside. They forced them into these pens. Where they had them without. It was Christmas. It was really cold, and there was no heater for them. There was no showers, there was no food,
No.
because the French had closed the borders in theory. Well, I think that was a pretext, but they closed them because they all had to go through a PCR. So it's absolute
Yeah.
chaos. There were migrants going back into Europe, escaping from Brexit, like Polish that didn't want to sign up for Brexit or whatever, and they just wanted to go back to the countries, like Polish, Central Europeans and stuff. There were like all these lorries bringing going back into the continent after bringing food into UK or the other way around and stuff. And they were absolutely like for 1 week or more, like they missed Christmas. They didn't have a Christmas that year. They missed New Year's Eve, and New Year's. And like it was like the charity of some people, like some locals from Dover, but especially the Sikh community, the Indians, the Sikh community, they cooked for them like loads of dishes, they with these temples,
Yeah.
and they brought for all of them, and they ordered, if they went as far as to order pizzas and bring them to the lorries. So that was a display of like law of abundance and stuff. So at that point, they were like the lorry drivers were Spanish, were Polish, were German, were Portuguese, were stuff, and they were all they were all in the same really horrible situation, not being able to go back to home for Christmas with the families and stuff. And no one was doing anything, and it's like that classic cruelty from the Tory party, and they like just let them in those pens, spend it. That was horrendous. That's one of the most shameful episodes of British history. So you see, when we talk about humanity, you see, like it was Boris Johnson at that time, like
Mm.
a pig such as Boris Johnson, just enjoying his own house and the comfort, like a person who's always have everything easy in life, and all these hardworking men, like taking a risk for their lives, driving so many miles, going into like Dover and stuff, and they're treated in such a way like animals, like they
Yeah.
didn't even had like showers or facilities for them to. Horrendous, there was, but yeah, it was like up to most of them were migrants, like, well, migrants. These Sikh families have been in the UK forever, but like from different backgrounds of life and stuff. But what's trying to convey as well is like because we've been suffering. The others, like in Spain, is like very socialistic. It's like Ireland, like very very socialistic country, very atheist. They they are like it's like that modern communism, that they're like very pro like the drug, that they put in the shoulder. They're very pro science in that regard.
Mhm.
And so Spain, they believe in the other side, but they haven't seen like all these far right newspapers uh, writing inflammatory comments against migrants, instigating
Yeah.
violence against them, like the aggressions, the attacks. Like they've killed Polish people in some events. They killed people because they were speaking Polish. Well, this is England. You speak in English, and they have there been aggressions against them, and they kill them. They don't realize this in Spain because they don't see that side of the other. So that's why it's so important that you just fall for the trap of far right. Like good people are good regardless of
Well,
ideologies.
I think this is where there's going to be a mass awakening, as I say, when people do start to realise that, say, for example, Jesus wasn't lying, that we do have a soul and there is an afterlife. We do have a quantum energy light being body within our consciousness, within our body. There is a quantum energy light being body. And I think when people start to realise the reality of that, then everything will topple. And that's what happened in Rome, you see. That's why Rome had to usurp Christianity, because the soldiers had stopped believing in that gold coin. That gold coin did not give them access to God. It did not give them the power of prayer, of having their prayers answered, the power to be forgiven and blessed by the gods. That gold coin, God saying, how did you get that gold coin? Okay? How did you achieve that gold coin? And that is whether your soul ascends, because again, going back to Christianity, in my Father's house there are many mansions. So the house is the universe, okay? And there are many mansions. There are many planets in this universe, far, far advanced than this one, where life is like a paradise. Life on Earth should be today like a paradise. People should not have to work. People should be enjoying their time, basically tending the garden, you know, looking after the plants, the animals, looking after each other. You know, when people have opportunity, when they have interests, when they're not struggling to survive, you don't find that people have loads of children. You know, like today they're talking about, oh, there's going to be a population explosion, blah, blah, blah. It's absolute nonsense. In every country where you've imposed massive poverty and removed women and children's rights, there is the population explosion. In every place where people have had a raised higher standard of living, human rights have been implemented, women's rights have been somewhat restored, though not fully, there you will see that birth rates have plummeted. Most of my friends have got no children. Most of them, you know, that is a fact. They haven't. And the ones that have only got one, at most two, right? And why? In a country like Britain that has been, you know, like you say, all the benefit system, people are flooding here to take advantage of the benefit system, which up until 10, 12 years ago was providing quite well. But people don't want to spend their time on benefits, do they? The majority of people, they want education, they want to travel, they want to have a career, they want to have a life. You know, they don't want to spend all the time raising children. And people who once you start teaching humanity and people how to actually raise a child and the responsibilities that go with it, most people don't want more than one or two children because they are that human, because they do care that much, because they want to be able to give as much as they can to be raising one or two children instead of bringing 5 or 6 or 7 children into the world. But when you rob women of rights and money and you're just going to have poverty, then you're going to have children having children. You see, that is why these people who are worried about, who are constantly saying there's too many people, they are their thinking and their approach to life actually creates the conditions that you will always have too many people, because there will always be too many people in a world that's established on thrift. When you have a world established on abundance and compassion, no matter how many people you have, those people create the abundance. Do you see what I mean? We create the abundance. And that's what Jesus preached on the Mount, that he showed that everybody there was able to feed each other because there was an abundance of food and the people shared and everybody ate well. You didn't have these people having less food and those people having a feast. Everybody ate enough that they needed, you see. And that's the whole idea, is that when people are working together and people are cooperative, that we should be building a heaven on this earth. And we're not building a heaven, we're building a hell. And the people that have...
Deborah?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, the people that have created this, the conditions for the building of this hell, even they're worried that they can't sustain it without losing power. You see, they know that their days are numbered, their time is short, and they're worried. And that's why they want this great reset. It isn't a great reset. It's just murder and theft. And that's what they've been doing. It's more colonialism, except this time, you know, they're all loosely headed under Zionism, which, again, people are saying, oh, it's Jewish. It's got nothing to do with Judaism. You know, you've got your Christian Zionists. You've got Boris Johnson, I am a Zionist. David Cameron, I am a Zionist. Theresa May, Zionist. Keir Starmer stands unequivocally with Zionists. Times of Israel was celebrating Starmer being made head of the Labour Party as a Zionist and his Zionist wife. You know, you've got Biden a Zionist, you've got Trump a Zionist, you've got the whole virtually of American Congress all Zionists, all swearing an oath of allegiance to Israel
Yeah.
before the American Constitution. Right now, these are common knowledge. So, so what is Zionism then? Is it a faith? Is it a politic? What is it? It's it's basically anti-Christian. That's what it is. It's
Well,
anti-human
it's
and anti-Christian.
yeah, it's anti-Jewish as well
And
because
anti-Jewish,
Theodore Herzl.
but Muslims aren't anti-Christian. Muslims love Jesus.
Well, they consider him a prophet.
Exactly.
But yeah, well, that was I think that's a good point to finish the live stream for today. I think it's been like really good to have you. It's like
We've had you
amazing,
abroad.
amazing knowledge that you have shared with us. And yeah, we'll just make an ongoing thing out of these streamers, these streams. We can just find another subject. I mean, this was very Christmassy, talking about Jesus and the
Yes.
Roman Empire. So, but next time we can just talk about other subjects, like more into the law of abundance and other ideas that you have developed. So, well,
And
thank you
I'd
for
like to hear more about, what was his name who you were talking about at the beginning? Um,
Anthony Sutton.
yes, yes. I would definitely like to hear more about him and his life.
Yeah, that would be an interesting talk, for
Yeah,
the next one, because I think this man is a British, like he went to America, and in his last days he had to return back to England because I think he saw his visa cancelled. Like he had been really successful with the Hawks, like with this with the far right American far righters, like what they call Tea Party
yeah,
like clubs and things, and he was like really really a neoliberal, not liberal in the leftist sense, but he was like kind of Bush, like ultra, ultra capitalist person. But he was totally disappointed by all that, and that's why they turned their back on him. Like because he exposed well, I've been fighting communism all my life. I've been fighting Bolshevism all my life, and turns out the very people I'm sitting at the table with every day at the think tank, all these Republican, um, setups and stuff. Turns out they are the ones who've been financing Wall Street. Like to
yeah,
him, it was a shock. So I feel sorry for the man because he returned back to England, and I think he was quite disappointed of the right. But he wrote all these books, and the shame is like they should be taught in schools, because they are really
yeah.
really revealing. But obviously, the establishment doesn't like that. So, well, thank you, Deborah, for being with us today,
Thank you for inviting me. And thank you
and
to the audience for taking time to listen as well. Thank you.
and keeping it interesting with the questions as well.
Yeah,
And yeah, like soon enough we'll have you again just to give it another go at news, the world, racism, all these things that we've been discussing. Thank you,
yeah.
Deborah.
Thank you.
All the best.
Yes, and to you and to everybody.
Thank
Hope you wishing you everybody a happy new year.
you. Likewise. Uh, we wish you all a happy new year since Christmas is already behind
Yeah.
our back. But yeah, all the best, guys.